So, any story you read will have an overarching narrative with character arcs, but sometimes they're so subtle you don't even notice until the story's over, or sometimes they can get changed halfway through the story. I believe that overarching narrative arcs and character arcs are a subtle art. I'm hoping in this video I can point people in some kind of direction to create a good narrative and a good character arc. Now, I'm very much aware I'm using the word good as a relative term. In this context, I'm trying to use it as this is a starting off point for you to go and create something better. We'll be discussing definitions, common archetypes, and analysing media to help you put things into context. But first, what am I drawing in the background? This is a poster for my webcomic Keys of Corruption, which is hopefully going to be coming out end of May, early June-ish. In a world where only 1% of the population is born with special powers called keys, distressing things start to happen to Rose Kingsley when her mentor dies. This sets into motion a dangerous chain of events that will change Rose's life forever. So if this sounds like your sort of thing, consider following me on my socials. Links are in the description. So first, let's talk about overarching narratives. Overarching narratives are only really applied to a long-form story. The kind of story that spans across a trilogy of books, 3 shows of a season, or an extremely long comic, like 100 chapters long. So let's take a look at some examples of that. First, the Hunger Games book and movie series. I'm going to specifically be talking about the movies because that's what I've seen, but the overarching narrative for this is the rebellion against Panem and President Snow. But that doesn't just happen in one movie. The first movie is about the actual Hunger Games, getting us familiar with the world. The second movie is about the growing conflict and the spark that lights the revolution. And the third and fourth movie are all about the actual rebellion and then its execution. Secondly, the Sherlock Holmes duology, the Robert Downey Jr. version. The overarching narrative is the subtle battle of wits between Sherlock and Moriarty. The entire first movie is building up to this Moriarty character that Sherlock has been introduced to, and he's trying to figure out who it is. The second movie is all about their chess game of a battle, which Sherlock then ends. Literally. So, now you've gotten a bit of an idea of what an overarching narrative is, let's have a look at 7 archetypal plots. Number 1. Overcoming the monster. The protagonist sets out to defeat an antagonistic force, often evil, that threatens the protagonist and or the protagonist's homeland. Examples of this would be Star Wars: A New Hope, James Bond, Naruto, and Dracula. Number 2. Rags to riches. The poor protagonist acquires power, wealth, and or a mate, loses it all, and then gains it back, growing as a person as a result. Examples of this are Cinderella, Aladdin, Great Expectations, and The Ugly Duckling. Number 3. The quest. The protagonist and companions set out to acquire an important object or go to a location. They face temptations and other obstacles along the way. Examples would include Lord of the Rings, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Number 4. Voyage and return. The protagonist goes to a strange land and, after overcoming the threats it poses or learning important lessons unique to that location, returns with experience. Examples would be Alice in Wonderland, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, Back to the Future, and Peter Pan. Number 5. Comedy. A light and humorous character with a happy or cheerful ending, and a dramatic work in which the central motif is the triumph over adverse circumstances, resulting in a successful or happy conclusion. To specify, this is more than just humor. It refers to a pattern where the conflict becomes more and more confusing, but is at last made plain in a very simple, clarifying moment. So basically, a lot of rom-com films fall into this category. So, examples: Much Ado About Nothing, Bridget Jones's Diary, and The Big Lebowski. Number 6. Tragedy. The protagonist is a hero with major character flaws or a great mistake which is ultimately their undoing. The protagonist's unfortunate end evokes pity at their folly and the fall of a fundamentally good character. Examples: Bonnie and Clyde, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, The Great Gatsby, and Hamilton. Number 7. Rebirth. An event forces the protagonist to change their ways and often become a better person. Examples include, and are not limited to, Crime and Punishment, Beauty and the Beast, The Secret Garden, and Iron Man. Now, let's talk about the difference between a character-driven narrative and a plot-driven narrative. The easiest way I can think to describe this to you is by comparing and contrasting Season 1 of Arcane to Season 2. So, spoilers ahead for Season 2 if you haven't seen it. So Season 1 immediately starts off with the consequences of characters' actions. Vanda has brought the people of the Undercity up to start a revolution, and it fails, which ends up killing Vi and Powder's parents. So, Vanda takes Vi and Powder under his wing, protects them like a father would. These 2 minutes has set up a character-driven narrative already. Let's jump a little bit further into Season 1. Jinx steals the Hex Gem, and leaves her monkey design at the scene. Caitlin, who has a small connection with one of Silco's goons, goes to Stillwater to question him, but he's been beaten up. Going to see the prisoner who did this, Vi, who has an established connection with the guy, identifies the monkey symbol and tells Caitlin she can get the proof she needs in order to prove Silco's involvement. In that small description, there's about 6 decisions made by characters that further the plot. The final season 1 scene I want to talk about is the dinner party scene, which is quite possibly the most important scene in the entire show. It's a combination of so many different decisions being led to this moment. Every decision Silco's made, every decision Vi's made, every decision Caitlin's made, every single feeling and action Jinx has had has been built up to this particular moment. Every single motivation has been laid out in front of us, and they're all led back to Jinx versus Powder. And after Jinx has an episode and ends up shooting Silco blindly, she realizes that she will always be Jinx, and thus fires the Hextech weapon and starts a war between the 2 cities. Arcane has 2 overarching narratives, A Tale of Two Cities and A Tale of Two Sisters. This final scene both starts and ends a section of these narratives. Powder and Vi as sisters no longer exist. All that is left is Jinx and Vi, and the growing divide between the oppressive Piltover and the oppressed Zorn, one that was extended by Hextech, has resulted in a declaration of war and rebellion by Zorn using their own tech. So, a character-driven narrative is one where a character's actions, reactions, and inner thoughts are the reason the plot keeps moving. It's a bit like Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. When creating a character-driven narrative, it's important to ask yourself, what happens next? How does this affect the world? And how does this affect the characters? This is an easy way to keep it simple for yourself. Moving on to Season 2 of Arcane, and the shift to a plot-driven narrative. It's important to note that in Season 2, the overarching narrative slightly shifts. It goes from A Tale of Two Cities and A Tale of Two Sisters to A Tale of Two Sisters and the release of the Arcane, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but they really didn't set up the Arcane being released in Season 1, so it kind of feels like it's coming out of nowhere. Essentially, if you wanted to change the overarching narrative when you're already in the story, do it slowly and try and make it as seamless as possible. The start of the plot-driven narrative comes in the form of Victor and Jace. Their narrative changes from character-driven to plot-driven when Victor wakes up from his cocoon-esque thing and leaves for the Undercity. Additionally, Jace's changes when he ventures down into the Hex Gates with Echo and Heimerdinger. From this point, the actions of 3 people are solely affecting the plot: Ambessa, Singed, and Victor, / the Arcane, depending on whether you believe he's in control or not. Now this works to bring the cast together for big moments. Warwick versus Jinx in Stillwater, which then is revealed to be Vander, Jinx and Vi taking Vander to Victor to heal him, Singed telling Ambessa about Warwick, then tries to storm the camp, Caitlin and Vi get on better terms, and then Jace kills Victor. These actions are happening to the characters rather than the characters forming those actions. And that is completely fine. It's still progressing the plot forward and into an amazing Season 2. Your characters don't need to be making every single decision to drive the plot forward. Sometimes things just happen to people, and to write a good overarching narrative, I believe it's about finding some kind of balance between a character-driven narrative and a plot-driven narrative. Obviously, depending on what kind of plot you prefer and what you're trying to say with the story affects what kind of plot you'll want as well. The obviousness of a character arc really does depend on what kind of overarching plot you're after. If you're going for a character-driven narrative, then your character arcs have to be in the forefront of your stories. If you're going for a plot-focused narrative, then your character arcs take a backseat. You'll still need one though. No one likes a character who doesn't change at all. So, what's the difference between a character-driven narrative and a character arc? Well, let's go back to Season 1 of Arcane. Jinx's character arc is having to overcome the decisions of whether she's Powder, a sweet girl just wanted to be with her family, or Jinx, a person molded to be a weapon with declining mental health issues. Vi's character arc is having to come to terms with the responsibility of being an older sister and a mentor, plus learning every decision she makes, good or bad, is her responsibility. I'm hoping you can see the difference between how I've described the narrative of Season 1 and with these character arcs. Because while these arcs are shaping the narrative, they aren't the narrative. A character arc, by definition of writing sites I used to research this video, is the change of a character in a story. This could be a personality change, physical change, emotional change, behavioral change, or moral change. Change does not sound like a word right now. Writing a character arc can be pretty simple, but the more complicated you make it, the more confused you'll get. So let's break it down. No matter what kind of character you're looking at, a character arc will always have 3 simple things: a beginning, a middle, and you guessed it, an end. Like I said, pretty simple. Let's go back to analysing media. First character on the roster is Katsuki Bakugo from My Hero Academia. This is going to contain manga and anime spoilers, so click away if you want to avoid those. When we first get introduced to Bakugo, he's bullying our main character Zuko Midoriya. He's an asshole, and he's a bit up his own arse too. You're not supposed to like him. one could argue that Bakugo's character arc starts when he gets kidnapped by the sludge villain, but I think it starts a little bit later than that. Bakugo's character arc doesn't start until he loses to Midoriya in the 2-on-2 battles in the first season. He doesn't know how to deal with it, so he actually has to start processing emotions that he's never felt before. And then Bakugo has 2 middle points. Both are as important as each other. The first one is in season 4, when Bakugo, Todoroki, Kami, and Inasa are having to take care of some pretty rambunctious kids. He grabs a kid by the arm, one that acted very similar to him when he was a kid, and tells him, "If you only look down on others, you'll never be able to recognize your own weakness." Now that's really important, because it means he's been able to reflect on his own actions, but he just doesn't really know how to deal with them yet. The second middle section is when Bakugo apologizes to Midoriya, a major moment not only for Bakugo's character, but also Midoriya, because it highlights the growth that Bakugo has had in the background. He knows that a sorry won't make up for what he's done, but he knows that it's a start, and the fact that this hard-headed asshole bully that we first met at the beginning of the story has bowed his head and apologized without insulting or shouting at each other, that's impressive. The ending for Bakugo's character, ironically, is when he dies. The whole sequence of his death is emotional, but the main thing that solidifies his finished character arc is his final thoughts. "Hey Izuku, can I still catch up to you?" Being soft and remorseful. He's changed. He's not the same character we were first introduced to at the beginning of the anime manga, and he's okay with that. The next character on the roster is Lian from Heaven Official's Blessing. Again, spoilers for the book. The story of TGCF is not told linearly, at least in the terms of Lian's character development. We start in book 1 with his character arc already complete, but we get to see the development in books 2 and 4. So let's break down his beginning, middle, and end. Pre-character arc Lian is the crown prince of his country, and he's well respected and looked up to. However, he's incredibly naive about the struggles of non-royal people and subconsciously looks down on them because of it. His arc starts when his people start to suffer from human face disease. Quick little sage interjection here. I hate human face disease. It makes me sick just thinking about it. I'm not a body horror girly, and I'm just gonna move on. I physically cringed. Okay, so that whole situation goes wrong. Lian gets cast out of heaven, and all of his people pretty much die. His suffering gets worse from there, and the middle of his arc is just after he's been killed with 100 swords, and is about to release the second round of human face disease. He's at the lowest point he's ever been at. He's been literally haunted by white no face, so honestly, understandable crash out. He ends up not doing that because a man shows him kindness by giving him a hat to keep the shade off him. It invigorates his humanity, and he tries to stop the disease from being released. He can't, and someone dies because of it. This leads to the ending of his arc. Lian is now the god of scrap collecting. Gone are the days of the castles and the fancy clothes and being treated like royalty. He now lives in a shack, collecting scraps. And he's okay with that. Ironically, Lian actually goes on 2 character arcs in Heaven Official's Blessing. The first one is his past, the second one is his present. The present one is a lot less clear and is more of a realization, but it's the development that he can be loved unconditionally, which I think is sad that he thought he was unlovable, but in the sense that this is a romance story, and it's also cute that the one he loves him so much and is basically the reason he's still alive. That's just cute to me. The final character we're going to be looking at is Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Zuko's arc is a unique one because he has a ton of middle sections because he keeps stumbling and losing his way. However, the beginning of his arc starts when his dad burns his face, exiles him, and tells him to come back when he finds the Avatar. At that point in time, there is no Avatar, so Zuko was essentially given an impossible task. The first middle point is when Zuko was in the Northern Water Tribe. If I remember correctly, this is pretty much the first time we see a section of Zuko that can be saved. He has potential to be good. I know that one could argue the Blue Spirit was his first act of good, but I see it more as a means to an end. He let Aang go so that he could capture him. The first time I think that this potentially registers for Zuko is when he realizes that Aang saved his life by not leaving him in the freezing outskirts of the Water Tribe. This sets Zuko on the trajectory of being unsure where his place is and whether or not he's fully good. This internal battle happens a lot throughout season 2, and he sees the effect of the Fire Nation on normal citizens. This all comes to a climax in the second middle point of his arc, the season 2 finale where he's forced to join a side, Azula and the Fire Nation or Iroh and the Avatar. He ends up picking Azula, and we see him pretty much immediately regret that, but he stays nevertheless. Again, we see the internal battle of whether or not he's on the right side until he confronts his father on the day of the eclipse. This is Zuko's third and final middle point. He's choosing good. He stands up not only to his father, but also redirects his lightning, which shows now his inner strength and knowing who he is. The end of Zuko's arc is him becoming the Emperor of the Fire Nation and being publicly friends with Aang. The two work very closely together after that and start bringing around an era of peace before Aang eventually dies. This was kind of a perfect ending for him since he struggled his entire life. It's important to remember when it comes to your main characters that they should always rise, aka the development will always be in an upwards trajectory. The only exception to this is if you're writing a tragic character / story. So hopefully by showing you a few different arcs, you're able to see just how much you can do with a beginning, middle and end approach to character arcs. Something else to note of is that once you've combined all this together, you're going to have a clear view of what your themes / what you're trying to say with your story is. Once you've realized these things, write them down on a bit of paper. Once written down, it's important to keep thinking back to them. A few reasons why I see stories start to drop in quality later down the line, because they either forget what their narrative direction is, or what their themes are. Hopefully you all found this interesting, or at the very least helpful. Please follow me on my socials. I'm active on Instagram, Blue Sky and Twitter, and I try to stream 3 days a week on Twitch. All my links are in the description. Oh, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel with engagement.